A new CBS News investigation exposes the connection between child labor in Africa and products many of us use every day. Amnesty International revealed in 2016 that children were mining cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. 2 years later, little has changed. Companies like Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, and Tesla depend on the element for their products. It's found in batteries used to power phones, computers, and electric cars. Deborah Pata went to the DRC to investigate the situation. She has the latest from Johannesburg, South Africa.
They're digging in trenches and laboring in lakes, hunting for treasure in a playground from hell. Hard enough for an adult man, unthinkable for a child. And yet tens of thousands of Congolese kids are involved in every stage of mining for cobalt. More than half the world's supply comes from the DRC. 20% of that is mined by hand. We traveled along collapsing dirt roads. Children are everywhere, digging for cobalt in abandoned open pit mines. And it's clear security officials in charge here, only some of them in uniform, have something to hide.
There's such sensitivity around cobalt mining that every few hundred feet we get stopped requesting letters, documents, even though we have official permission to be here.
But for the Chinese middlemen we saw who buy the cobalt, there are no such constraints. They have free access to the mines. Inside, women and children are doing so-called artisanal mining. But don't be fooled. This is no quaint cottage industry. At barely 10 years old, children lug heavy sacks of cobalt to be washed in rivers. From as early as 4, they can pick it out of a pile. And even those too young to work spend much of the day breathing in toxic fumes.
The officials deny that there's child labor. Clearly it's obvious that there is, but whenever a camera or security person or policeman appears, then the children are chased away.
Ziki Swazi is 11 years old and agreed to meet us outside the mine.
Why aren't you in school?
My parents are dead, he said, and I stay with my grandma.
So you need to make money for your granny?
Yes.
We asked these companies whether child-mined cobalt is being used in their products. All acknowledge problems with the supply chain, but say they require their suppliers to follow responsible sourcing guidelines. Apple said it leads the industry in supply chain standards and last year cut ties with the largest artisanal cobalt supplier. Microsoft told us it does not tolerate child labor and that they are working with NGOs to eliminate it. Samsung said it's mapping its supply chain, and Tesla explained it performs audits and has very little cobalt in its batteries. But our investigation shows just how complicated it is to trace child-mined cobalt in the global supply chain. We followed the mineral as it left the mines, piled high on every mode of transport available. Sacks were already mixed up without labels, making it impossible to know who had mined them.
The children's cobalt is brought here to this market, where it is bought by a Chinese company for extremely low prices.
We wanted to see whether there was any attempt to check if the cobalt had been mined by children. So our team went back later with a hidden camera. When we offered to sell a truckload of cobalt, nobody asked us who mined the mineral, only what the quality was. This man told us that the Chinese traders here bought all the cobalt and sold it mainly to one Chinese company, Congo Dongfang Mining, known locally as CDM. CDM is owned by global Chinese giant Huayu, but Huayu said they stopped buying from that market last year and have put in place a detailed program to eliminate child labor from their supply chain. And yet, in this murky process of sourcing cobalt, one thing is clear: children are still here, carrying the weight of our high-tech world on their shoulders.
We spoke to 8 major tech companies who've been linked to the supply chain. And while some of them have joined initiatives to solve this problem, we saw very little evidence at the mines we visited of anyone actually helping these children. PACT, an NGO working with Apple, Microsoft and Huayu described support from these multinationals as a drop in the ocean compared to the dozens of companies still buying child-mined cobalt. Deborah Patter, CBS News, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Bobby Ghosh is a foreign affairs columnist and commentator, and he joins me now on set. Welcome to you, Bobby.
Thank you.
This is so profoundly disturbing and shameful. Let's start with some baseline knowledge here of cobalt. How critically important is cobalt for these technology companies?
So lithium batteries now are everywhere, right? They're in our cars, they're in our phones, they're in our laptops. There are 2 or 3 different kinds of lithium battery. The one kind has about 50% cobalt. So it kind of varies from battery to battery, but it's a very, very important component. It's very hard to think of lithium batteries, although there are some scientists who are trying without any cobalt at all.
So these technologies would not exist without it?
No, a couple of years, well, maybe 15 years ago, cobalt was worth nothing. There were cobalt mines in Idaho, in Canada, that shut down because nobody wanted it. Now with all our new tech batteries, now cobalt is a very big deal, $80,000 a ton.
Wow. So there are reports that Apple is looking to buy cobalt directly from mining companies instead of the middleman like you saw in Deborah Patta's piece there. How would that affect the supply chain?
Well, that would be a good thing, because if you have a middleman, and particularly if the middleman is a Chinese company, as we've seen there, who are claiming that there are no child labor, whereas the reporting is clear that there are, if you're dealing directly, then you're eliminating the middleman. You have a greater control over who is producing the cobalt and how it's being brought there, the environmentally sustainable ways, and avoiding child labor. You're paying a fair price. The prices listed on that factory were ridiculous. So that helps a lot. It would also help if the actual refining of this material were moved more and more to the places where they're being produced. Right now, Congo, like a lot of countries, is exporting most of this raw material, and the refining and where the real value addition is done outside. The government of Congo would like people to come and do that refining in the Congo. That would probably be a good thing.
What about Tesla? They're reportedly building a battery gigafactory in the U.S. that will source all its materials from North America.
Yeah.
How realistic is that pledge?
Well, we'll find out. The place they're looking for, ironically, is called Cobalt. It's called Cobalt. It's in Ontario, in Canada. There used to be a silver mine there, and there are deposits of cobalt there. I'm not sure how much. The fact that Tesla thinks it can get enough cobalt from there to produce its batteries is a good sign. It will mean that the cobalt will be much more expensive because it will be mined in Canada, but we can be sure that there will be mined under strict environmental controls. There will not be child labor. It won't change the fact that there is child labor in DRC, though, because there are lots of buyers around the world, Chinese buyers, who won't care. So we may feel better about ourselves, but those kids are going to keep working those mines and enduring those conditions unless a larger effort is made to save them from that.
And when you look at possible demand increasing, electric cars are expected to double the world's demand for cobalt by the year 2025, and that increased demand would likely drive the already high price of that metal even higher. So how would that affect life for these children in the DRC?
Well, if people begin to mine cobalt in other places, they're looking in Sweden as well, in Sweden, Canada, and other places, then the demand from the DRC may come down, and that, again, may make us feel less guilty about our cell phones. But those kids, then, the little money they're making, even that will shrink, and they'll be making even less money because they need to earn a living. We heard from the young man there, he needs the money for the upkeep of his family, to look out for his grandma. That's not going to go away unless the world gets involved and imposes sort of standards at the mines themselves. It's not a question of where else can you buy cobalt to salve your guilty conscience. It's a question of trying to see if the world community can impose some controls, some standards, some regulations at the mine heads themselves.
All right, Bobby Ghosh, thanks very much for your perspective. Really appreciate it, Bobby.
Anytime.